Afternoon adventures. Ever since D&D 5th edition invented cantrips, little lowest end magics that you can cast as much as you want, they've been a staple of every spellcasting class for the last 10 years, and in the 2024 revisions, there are even more ways to cast them than ever. Warlocks have always held the title for the strongest damage cantrip, with Eldritch Blast specifically with Agonizing Blast tacked onto it, but now the class has a lot more versatility, plenty of options, because the Agonizing Blast Invocation allows us to choose one of our damage cantrips instead of being relegated to only Eldritch Blast. Most Warlock cantrips interact with the invocation in very straightforward ways. You cast it, you add your damage once, you call it good, but there are a few that stand out. Eldritch Blast itself works the same way it always has, adding the damage to each beam, making it still technically the strongest on its own. We'll get to what I mean by technically in a second. True Strike now makes a weapon use charisma for an attack, and at higher levels, 5th level and above, adds more damage to the attack also. This is a huge step up from the uncastable trash that it used to be. And so that's already a positive change, but Agonizing Blast can be applied to it because the cantrip has you make an attack roll, it deals damage, you can add your charisma to the damage of that attack. And since the spell is on the Warlock list, we can take it at level 1 and take the invocation at level 1 and deal, let's say, a d8 with a quarterstaff or a light crossbow even, plus 6 if our charisma is 16 or 17. Green Flame Blade and Booming Blade are similar in that they have us make a weapon attack and at higher levels add damage to that attack, but they also have rider effects, unlike True Strike. And that is where Agonizing Blast starts getting spicy, because Agonizing Blast applies to all the damage rolls of these cantrips. So if you hit a creature with Green Flame Blade and fire arcs to a second target, that target takes the extra charisma damage as well. If we smack a creature with Booming Blade and then they move, the extra damage gets our charisma added to it. And since these cantrips also add their own damage onto a weapon attack, in the right build, they can easily outpace Eldritch Blast. Like, easily. This is especially true if we use Pact of the Blade to attack with our charisma in the first place, keeping our class single attribute dependent. And, of course, it gets more powerful if we get our hands on a magic weapon. Even just something like a +1, +2, +3 weapon will do us just fine, although something like a vicious weapon, or even like a flame tongue or something, would also be pretty strong. It is worth noting these cantrips don't play nicely with the Thirsting Blade and Devouring Blade invocations, but we can actually squeeze some pretty similar damage out with the cantrips instead, with Agonizing Blast, for fewer invocations. So when planning a build, we kind of just gotta choose one or the other, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Thunderclap is one of a few cantrips that can damage all the creatures within 5 feet of us at the same time. It uses d6s, so adding our charisma to the damage is pretty noticeable, actually, and it applies to every target, of course. And last but not least, Create Bonfire is still potentially the highest damaging cantrip in the whole game, always has been, as long as we can keep our enemies' feet in the fire. But when Agonizing Blast adds our charisma damage to each instance of Create Bonfire's damage, its potential skyrockets into the stratosphere. There's really no contest in a prolonged fight. In a party with a strong grappler or characters who can push our opponents into the flames, dealing that damage over and over, potentially dealing damage multiple times per round against one creature or several. It does require concentration, unfortunately, but as a Warlock we don't have that many spell slots anyway, so we might not be concentrating all the time. It might not actually be a huge deal. The versatility of Agonizing Blast is already very impressive, but we can actually push it even further beyond by adding the Pact of the Tome invocation as well. The invocation lets us choose any 3 cantrips in the whole game from any class list, and they count as Warlock cantrips. That part's important. By the powers of these 2 invocations combined, we can add our charisma modifier to the damage of any cantrip in the game. Every damage cantrip benefits from more damage, and many have side effects like reducing the target's speed, lighting them up and negating invisibility, or penalizing their next saving throw, so making those deal stronger damage is always a solid plan. But there are a few that interact with Agonizing Blast in ways that truly shine. Acid Splash is a proper area of effect now, and while its area is only a 5-foot radius, that's more than most cantrips get. The potential to hit multiple creatures with one casting for a number of d6 plus charisma is pretty worth the smaller damage die, I think. Again, this one's especially effective when we and our allies can group the enemies up, and it's also quite good against mounted combatants, since they're obviously within 5 feet of each other. That obviously applies to Green Flame Blade and Create Bonfire as well, but Green Flame Blade is melee only, very specifically, and there's an argument that some creatures might be too high up on their mounts, on certain mounts, for Create Bonfire as it fills a 5-foot cube. So if they're riding on an elephant or something, they might be sitting too high up, whereas Acid Splash has a range of 60 feet. You can even hit aerial targets with it. Produce Flame gets to add the damage to every attack we make with it across the 10 minutes that it lasts, and while that isn't that special turn by turn, at least we have the option to do it. If we like this cantrip, we can cast this cantrip, we can benefit from Agonizing Blast just fine. And finally, well, 2. Word of Radiance and Sword Burst, they both function the same as Thunderclap, but deal radiant and force damage respectively. Word of Radiance also allows us to choose our targets, so there's no friendly fire unless we choose to do friendly fire. Any cantrip that can damage multiple creatures at the same time is pretty good in my books, so increasing that damage is all the sweeter. Now while we're here, I also want to mention some other invocations that buff cantrips. Repelling Blast now applies to any cantrip that has an attack roll, which excludes things like Thunderclap and Acid Splash, but at least if we hit someone with a Booming Blade, we can push them back 10 feet, and then now they have to move up to hit us, and they take the extra thunder damage, things like that. It is worth noting, the push only affects creatures when you hit them, so the extra damage from Booming Blade in that case wouldn't push the creature again, funny as that would be. At least to the best of my understanding. Eldritch Spear can increase a cantrip's range, potentially very massively, but only if it has a range of 10 feet or more to begin with. So our Blade cantrips, our True Strike, because that technically has a range of self, and our Thunderclaps, Word of Radiance, etc. aren't going to be affected by Eldritch Spear. But something like Poison Spray, which only has a range of 30 feet, can benefit pretty greatly from this, and any of our ranged cantrips really can be made sniper weapons with this one invocation. Warlocks stand as the leaders in cantrip technology, always have, but there are other classes and subclasses that can help us push our 0 level spells even further. For starters, Celestial Warlocks get Radiant Soul at level 6, adding charisma to damage with fire and radiant spells, though only to a single target. Overall, not the best feature if we're casting a fireball or something, but a firebolt, Fire Variety Sorceress Burst, one target of Green Flame Blade, or any other single target spell will work just fine. The benefit fully stacks with Agonizing Blast, and the subclass even gets Sacred Flame automatically, which we can stack Agonizing Blast and Radiant Soul on. Cantrips that deal fire, cold, lightning, acid, or poison damage can benefit from the Dragon Ancestry Sorcerer's level 6 damage boost. Unlike most features that add damage to spells, Elemental Affinity does not specify sorcerer spells. That means we can stack it onto our Warlock's Agonizing Cantrips. It only applies to one damage roll though, so Create Bonfire and Green Flame Blade don't benefit as much as they do from Agonizing Blast. Also, Produce Flame will only work once. Acid Splash works well though, since AoEs use one damage roll for all their targets. Sorcerers can also grab the Transmute spell metamagic to make other spells deal their favored damage type. You can do that with Thunderclap, though unfortunately you can't also do it with Word of Radiance, so I think that one's a little better. Evocation Wizards have long been thought of as the best blaster casters, and even though that's wrong, they do have some very effective features. At level 3, they get Potent Cantrip, allowing them to deal half damage with a cantrip even when the target succeeds on its saving throw or when the wizard misses with their attack roll, just like leveled spells, and that's very good for increasing the bottom line, getting some damage out on your turn, even if it's not the full brunt of whatever you're trying to do. And much like the sorcerer thing, this feature does not specify wizard cantrips, so it does apply. It does cost 3 levels, and we do have to have a 13 intelligence, but if we're inclined to make a cantrip-centric build, this could be a strong addition. It's important to note though, the target takes half of the cantrip's damage, so as far as I can tell, it wouldn't let you deal half the damage of a full-on Green Flame Blade, Booming Blade, or True Strike, only the bonus damage from the spell itself starting at level 5. When the spell adds a d8 or a d6. The extra effects of Jumping Fire and Booming Energy don't apply either if you miss with the attack roll, only half the damage. The Gray's Weapon Mastery property could benefit from a potent cantrip setup, but only if we have a good strength score for some reason. Belts of Giant Strength exists. Gauntlets of Ogre Power exist, so it's a possibility, but that's going to be, case by case. Those seem to be the outstanding cantrip options for a Warlock to steal. It's kind of like magical secrets, in a way, now that I think about it. What fun. Anyway, I've touched on most of the topics that I wanted to cover in this video, so it's high time I wrap things up. There's just one more thing I want to speak on before I go. I want to address the Shillelagh in the room. Does Agonizing Blast apply to Shillelagh in 2024? Does it apply to Magic Stone? These transmutation cantrips don't deal damage directly, but rather empower a stick we're holding or a few pebbles to use our spellcasting ability with potentially a different damage die when we smack someone with it. Agonizing Blast description says, choose one of your known Warlock cantrips that deals damage. You can add your spellcasting modifier to the spell's damage rolls. Because Shillelagh doesn't involve any attack rolls or saving throws, or deal direct damage without those things, I'm of the opinion that Shillelagh doesn't have damage rolls, therefore Agonizing Blast has nothing to apply to. Magic Stone is a little more ambiguous because it uses spell attacks specifically, and because we wouldn't normally be able to attack with the pebbles in the same way we would a clever quarterstaff, improvised weapons notwithstanding. Still, the same way we wouldn't treat hitting someone with a sword that has magic weapon cast on it as dealing damage with a spell, I don't think Agonizing Blast applies to either of these cantrips. That said, allowing it at your table shouldn't break anything. It's actually very similar to the old Life Drinker invocation, adding damage to, or packed weapons anyway. Comes online much sooner though, and Shillelagh uses Pact of the Tome instead. Either way, dealing a few extra damage points with a person's attacks isn't going to make or break your encounters, so don't be afraid to allow it if your players want it. I just don't think it applies strictly as written. And I'd be happy to be wrong about that. If Jeremy Crawford or someone wants to provide more detail and say that it works, I'm totally fine with that as well. Now that that's out of the way, that's all I wanted to say. Tell me what your favorite combat cantrip is in the comments, and feel free to politely argue about Shillelagh and Magic Stone if you want. Just be nice to each other, and happy adventuring in 2025.